I want to just go over a few of the testimonies that have been heard in the George Zimmerman trial as I raised the question, will he walk, which I think he should, or will he be lynched? Because if he is found guilty even on the charge of manslaughter in the state of Florida, that will indeed be a lynching. The penalty there could be anywhere from 10 to 30 years, depending on how the judge would look at the manslaughter charge if the second degree cannot hold up. And quite frankly, I think most people who are willing to look at this trial objectively realize that the prosecution did not meet the bar that this is a second degree murder. They could say manslaughter. He was 17 years old and his life is gone, and a jury may come back with manslaughter as a form of retribution, but not necessarily as a legal position. And juries can do that. They can do a retribution and give a sentence on the manslaughter, but we don't know what the judge will do in terms of how much time. He could get up to 30 years for manslaughter in Florida prison. But I want to go over a couple of things that I think are critical for us now. And one is that there was a U.S. Army JAG Corps officer and attorney named Alexis Carter who testified at the trial last week, who is a jovial, if you will, sort of a well-dressed, well-spoken attorney. And of course, in the U.S. Army, they're called JAG officers. Who was Trayvon Martin's teacher in Seminole County when Alexis Carter was in the process of moving up in the legal field, took a job as an adjunct professor at Seminole College and taught a course on criminality and maybe criminal defense, or somewhere along the criminal it was taught in that class. And George Zimmerman was one of Alexis Carter, attorney Alexis Carter, a JAG officer Alexis Carter's students. And I was very impressed with Alexis Carter, his demeanor, when he began to speak about George Zimmerman. First of all, he said that George Zimmerman aced and was one of his better students. And he spoke very freely and very lovingly, as if he held no traditional black animosity against George Zimmerman. Because, you know, if you're black, you're supposed to want to see George Zimmerman convicted, and you're supposed to dislike him. You're supposed to come in upset. You're supposed to come in, and you're supposed to show to the black community, everybody in the hood and everybody black, and to all the liberal whites, if you're black, you're supposed to show that you are against George Zimmerman. He's guilty. He killed Trayvon Martin and he ought to burn in hell. That's what you're supposed to do. Well, this officer, this JAG officer, did no such thing. In fact, he warmly greeted George Zimmerman when he was asked, do you recognize the defendant as a student in your class? And whereupon attorney JAG officer Alexis Carter said, hey George, how you doing? And smiled. He was very, very pleasant about the whole matter. Indeed, his demeanor, and while I believe his testimony was absolutely truthful, I don't think he was trying to help George, but you could surely see there was no Rachel Jantel in Alexis Carter. He testified to the best of his ability. He testified to what he thought George knew. And I think the other thing is that the first time I saw George Zimmerman ever smile was when his professor was talking about him in his classroom tenure. I thought that was a very touching moment between teacher and student. A black professional who is a lawyer and has everything to lose, the black community finds in any way he's been friendly towards George Zimmerman. And George Zimmerman, who has been pummeled by the black community, hated by the black community, death threats upon him, his family, his wife, his mother, his father. The black community has risen up and threatened to kill him, and yet here's a black lawyer. And they have a rapport going on in the courtroom. I thought was absolutely fascinating that they had such a rapport. And I gotta say that I don't know what's in the mind of Alexis Carter, whether he thinks George Zimmerman is guilty or not. But I can tell you this, he likes George Zimmerman. And so this would have to state that during the time that George Zimmerman was in the class for an entire semester with this well-trained, very bright, very articulate, well-spoken JAG officer, they must have had a good rapport, which then has to state that if George Zimmerman was a racist, I think that he would have demonstrated his racism against, because this Alexis Carter is black on black. He's as black as they come, everybody. He's as black as Wesley Snipes. In fact, he looks like a junior Wesley Snipes. So if George Zimmerman was a racist, there ain't no way 2 years ago that he would have been in that class and they came away with the kind of rapport. I mean, this rapport between Alexis Carter and George Zimmerman, was unmistakable. It warmed up the courtroom, and Alexis Carter brought it in there. And George Zimmerman reciprocated because he knew they were friends. They were very, very good friends from student to teacher. I don't know any of my teachers that I was a friend with. But anyway, and then he said, I gave him an A. He aced the course. George Zimmerman is not a racist. Now, you can go ahead and conclude. That's my statement. That's not Alexis Carter. I'm stating George Zimmerman is not a racist. There ain't no way that after watching Alexis Carter that anybody who wants justice, not retribution, but anybody who wants justice would ever call George Zimmerman a racist. And, the real racist on that night, that fateful February night, was Trayvon Martin. Now, I'm not here to injure his family and make his friends and everybody feel bad. I'm just here with the facts, ma'am, just the facts. We had some vulgar language being spoken by George Zimmerman, but he referred to him as an effing punk. Well, a punk is not a racial term. It's generic. Any young boy can be called a punk. And then he called him, an a-hole. I don't even want to say that, but, oh, my God. But I want to try to be as clear as I can. That's not a racist term. Everybody's got one of those. So I think that when you look at what was said that night, as opposed to George Zimmerman, as opposed to what Trayvon Martin called him a creepy ass cracker. Okay, all right, I said it. And you'll forgive me, you'll pray with me, right? And then later on, in a second response to Rachel Jean Pierre, called him a nigger. Trayvon Martin called George Zimmerman a nigger. So the racial slurs, we know clearly now from testimony that's been entered into court records that the only racist person out there that night was Trayvon Martin, by the language that he used. Because George Zimmerman had every opportunity to call Trayvon Martin a nigger, but he didn't. He called him a punk. Had it been a black man out there, a black man would have called Trayvon Martin a nigger. He had every opportunity. He didn't do it, everybody. He didn't do it. The question now, this case hinges on pretty much, I think most people observing this, and the lawyers are believing, that the case hinges on who was it that was on that tape yelling for help that night. We've had some pretty stirring testimony. And, the talking heads, the liberal people in the dung-head media, were they playing this up to no end, that when Sabrina Fulton gets on the stand, it's going to be an emotional time. She's going to be talking about that's my son on that tape, and everybody's going to be in tears. The courtroom is going to be broken up. And when I watched her on that stand, I thought she was very calm. I think she's a very good-looking woman, by the way. I think that she probably had some hard knocks. And having gone through what she's gone through, I think she's a really good-looking woman, I think. I hope Elizabeth's not listening to me, but maybe Elizabeth will, But beyond that, she was not emotional. She was not emotional. She was straightforward. She didn't tear up. She didn't, have an outburst. She just said, that's Trayvon Benjamin Martin. The same thing with George Zimmerman's mother. Neither was she emotional. She said, that's my boy George. And that was it. The other thing I think is critical here is the fact that if the case is going to hinge on this, then the prosecution ought to rest and ask for an acquittal now before giving this matter to the jury. Because the Vietnam Army medic in the person of John Donnelly, who testified that he had, as a profession, during the Vietnam War, as a medic, to treat people that were injured, to give them the morphine, and to, take them off the battlefield once they were shot. And when the screams went up from something, or a hand grenade going off and blowing half of their stomach out, when those screams, he said, after having talked to these men, for months, and you get to know their voices, you even got to know their voices when they screamed out for help, and he rushed directly to their aid. He testified tearfully that he would know who it was that was injured in Vietnam as a medic. Then he went on to testify that George was a friend of his, and that they had sold him some sort of an insurance policy, somehow not had been involved in the insurance policy, and that he had now given $2,500 to George's defense fund and $500 to George personally, and had purchased $1,700 worth of suits and ties for George to wear during the trial. In fact, George had asked him once about how to tie a Windsor tie for a necktie, and that just warmed his heart to this man. George Zimmerman is not a racist, and the courts ought to cut him loose. There is a movie where these white men down in Mississippi raped a little 9-year-old girl. And Samuel Jackson plays the part of the father who caught them coming out of the courtroom and blew them away. And the sheriff, who was a white man carrying those, was shot as well and lost his leg. And one would have thought that that Mississippi white sheriff would have been angry at Samuel Jackson for shooting him. But he got on that stand and told the judge to cut him loose. I would have done the same thing. Cut him loose. Cut him loose. But that was a white man in that trial, in that movie, saying, cut this black man loose because he ain't guilty. He was defending the honor of his child, of his daughter. And I say to black America, cut George Zimmerman loose. Cut him loose. Cut him loose. Let him go and give him back his life. I'm James David Manning, everybody. Don't forget, everybody, we need your financial support here in the dog days of summer. It's already July. And the giving, while a number of people have been consistent in their giving, faithful in their giving, some have not. And we're asking you, please remember us during this season of giving. We need you to just go ahead and put us on a regular giving program through your banking system or through your checking system. Every time you pay, maybe your cell phone bill, you'll send us a gift as well. If you do that, you'll say, well, each time I pay my cell phone bill, I'm going to make sure that I send a gift to the Outlaw Ministry. We realize that the ministry and Manning is in the midst of a not so easy to get along with community, and stands out and really kind of does some things that some may even consider to be quite brave in light of the fact that both the government and many community leaders and people are not in lockstep with him. So we're going to do whatever we can, if it's $5, $10, $50, $100, whatever it is that you're able to give. And please, some of you might want to be reminded to put us on your big time donor list if you can. If you have the resources right now and everybody's out of the house and you just have the resources sitting there, and you might say, well, a $10,000 gift to the ministry or a $20,000 gift, or you may want to make us a part of your estate planning. And we pray that you will receive that in the appropriate light, because those who have the heart to give to us would not be offended by giving to us in your estate planning and endowing our school, or endowing the Manning Report, or endowing the Breakfast Club. Pray about that. We thank you so very much for being a part of the great work that God's doing here in the earth. I'm James David Manning. I'm the Lord's servant.
All the time, the Manning Report is sure to blow your